Looks like we have audio, Greg.
Yeah, I just used the phone. Hopefully that's not a problem.
Yep, loud and clear. We're just going to get the meeting started then. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Do you mute me then?
No, it'll be fine just at the beginning of the meeting. We just have a few resolutions to get through, and then we'll move into the delegation.
Thank you.
And we'll just give the deputy clerk just one moment to start the YouTube live stream.
The stream is live.
This
Perfect,
conference will now be recorded.
Right.
This meeting is now called to order. I'd like to welcome everyone this evening. And for roll call, Councillor Ham is not available to attend the meeting this evening. Now we'll take a moment for reflection and respect, please. Thank you. Confirmation of the agenda.
That council adopts the agenda for the meeting of December 15th, 2021 as amended by adding the following item. Catfish Creek Conservation Authority correspondence received December 14th, 2021 respecting regulation 68721.
Okay, someone to move and someone to second. Deputy Mayor Anders and Councillor Barber. Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, we'll move into delegations and public meetings. And we do have a delegation this evening. Greg Fenty has joined us from the Elgin Federation of Agriculture, and he's going to be presenting Homegrown Campaign Farmland Preservation. So welcome, Greg, and I'll turn this over to you now.
Some of you might be from around the table. So if you don't know me, I'm Greg Fenty. I'm on the Policy Advisory Committee for OFA from Elgin County, and I'm also the Elgin County Federation of Agriculture's Vice President. It's not a big deal. Tracy's at a board meeting today, so unfortunately she can't make all of these meetings, so you're stuck with me. Do you want to show the slides, put it in presentation mode, and I'll have you go through them? Oh, you're doing the same thing. Excellent. Wonderful. Okay, so if you don't know, the Ontario Federation of Agriculture represents more than 38,000 families. In Tracy's territory at Oxford, there's 1,400 members. Here in Elgin, we got 1,100. The OFA works to ensure the agri-food sector is included and consulted in any legislation that impacts the sustainability of agriculture. Next slide. In May of this year, the OFA launched a homegrown campaign. The key messages were preserving and protecting farmland and food production. It was a digital campaign on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and also highlighted the effect urban growth has on our finite agricultural resources. The homegrown campaign was a call to action for people to support the need to protect farms and food. The target audience was urban, and to date, there's over 17,000 signatures. Next slide. Ontario's farmlands are a finite and shrinking resource. As you've noticed, they aren't making any more of it. Ontario cannot sustain continued losses of agricultural land while maintaining our ability to produce food, fiber, and fuel. And did you know that in Ontario, farms encompass 12.3 million acres of land, which is actually only 5% or less than 5% of Ontario's total land? And I was a little surprised by that. In 2016, we learned that we're losing 175 acres of land per day. That does include classes 1, 2, and 3. That's the good farmland. Next slide. So even though we occupy less than 5% of Ontario's land, we actually contribute, we're the biggest economic driver in Ontario. In 2019, Ontario's agriculture and agri-food sector from field to fork contributed more than $47 billion to Ontario's economy and supported more than 860,000 jobs. This is bigger than Ontario's automotive industry. Please do not lose sight of this when making decisions about future farmland losses. The OFA endorses the agricultural policies in the provincial policy statement, which states that in prime agricultural areas, all types of sizes and intensity of agriculture uses and rural farm practices are promoted and protected. Next slide. So the OFA advocates for the local planning process because it provides a framework for a balanced consideration of land uses for agriculture and for development. It allows our members and our local federations the opportunity to provide an input on ag impact. Yet, despite the existing provisions of the local planning process, we're still losing agricultural lands in Ontario at a rate that is not sustainable for the long-term food security economic viability. Next slide. In Ontario, or only 14% of the countries in the world are self-sufficient and have excess crop production. Many countries are not in a position to meet their own domestic food production needs. Canada and Ontario are actually producing a surplus. This is a good thing. This sets up a favorable export market for Ontario's agriculture goods, which is one reason why our sector is such an important part of Ontario's economy. We need these lands to remain in agricultural production if it will continue to be the economic driver of Ontario's economy. The world's population is expected to rise to 9.8 billion by 2015, and we're going to need to feed all these people. The local planning process is a tool to help ensure these lands are protected for this use. Next slide. In order to feed these people, we cannot afford to lose more land. And OFA expresses deep-seated concern with the recent proliferation of MZOs issued. MZOs are ministerial zoning orders. I'm sure you guys are more familiar with it than I am. MZOs eliminate the conversation around whether proposed growth can be accommodated through intensification, redevelopment, and in designated growth areas, particularly now that the requirement for compliance with the provincial policy statement has been removed. The use of MZOs, as we've been seeing lately, do not provide an adequate framework for understanding the impact of taking land out of production. When these lands are left in agriculture production, they have the potential to continue to produce food, jobs, and environmental benefits forever. These are good things. Next slide. So the OFA makes the following recommendations to the municipalities. Fixed permanent boundaries for all settlement areas, the requirement for using existing green fields before new lands are designated, and an adoption of broader province-wide policy to distribute urban growth more evenly across Ontario. Next slide. The OFA believes advanced public notice for MZOs and any amendments to them is important. MZOs weaken the local planning process by providing developers and municipalities with a workaround that could cause poor outcomes down the line. Next slide. Once a farm is turned into a shopping center, a warehouse, or a subdivision, it will never produce food again. We lose the food, fiber, or fuel that was grown on that land permanently. Unless it was made of gingerbread, a house cannot be eaten. That's a funny joke. You can laugh at that one. A good example would be Waterloo Region and their protected countryside policies. For decades now, they have been a leader in identifying key agricultural areas, developing hard countryside lines, and still growing their urban boundary areas in high-quality sectors. They gain people's support by setting up a process that allows for a transition for a better intensification. Next slide. Aside from food production, farmland provides an expansive list of environmental benefits to all Ontarians. Once ag lands are taken out of production, ecological benefits like wildlife habitat, carbon sequestration, climate change, and groundwater recharge are no longer possible on that land. A drop of rain that lands on the sidewalk will not soak into the field the same way as my hay field. These benefits are benefits that benefit all Ontarians, not just farmers. Next slide. As you might notice, the COVID-19 pandemic has amplified the need for local food production. Consumers are increasingly looking for local grown produce, meats, and dairy products. Local food production is a great way to build a more resilient food supply chain. Next slide. The bottom line here is we're down to less than 5% of Ontario's land base that can be suitable for agri-food, and all the jobs, economic benefit, environmental impact, and food security that that land can provide. The last slide is a thank you. As you know, I'm not Tracy, but I'll do my best to answer any questions. Otherwise, you'll see Tracy's information down here. You can email her, or if you really want, I can probably get her phone number for you. So, are there any questions that I'm capable of answering?
Does council have any questions for Greg this evening? Seeing none, thank you very much, Greg, and have a great evening.
Thanks for having me here today, guys. Thank you.
Josh, could you read the resolution, please?
That the presentation from Greg Fenty of the Elgin Federation of Agriculture regarding homegrown campaign farmland preservation be received as information.
Okay, someone to move and someone to second. Councillor Charlton and Councillor Oslach. Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Josh, could you please read the next resolution so we can recess for the Committee of Adjustment hearing?
That council recess at 7:10 p.m. to commence a Committee of Adjustment hearing to consider application A0821 respecting 48 St. Andrew Street and application A0921 respecting 42 South Street East in the town of Elmer.
Okay, someone to move and someone to second. Councillor Chapman and Deputy Mayor Andrews. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. The Committee of Adjustment of the Town of Aylmer is convened to consider application A0821 and A0921. Additional information relating to the applications is available for inspection between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. weekdays at Aylmer Town Hall. Signed written submissions shall be accepted by the Secretary Treasurer prior to or during the hearing, and such submissions shall be available for inspection by any interested party. In addition, if a party who is notified does not attend the hearing, the committee can proceed and the party is not entitled to any further notice of hearings. A copy of the decision will be mailed to those persons who attend or are represented at the hearing and those who have filed a written request with the Secretary for notice of the committee's decision. The committee will receive input in the following order: agent or applicant, the public, manager of planning and development, and the clerk. Application number A0821 is made by Herman Neufeld, the owner of the property known municipally as 48 St. Andrew Street in the town of Aylmer. The applicant is requesting a minor variance from the requirements of the town zoning bylaw number 5799 as amended. The applicant is seeking relief from section 7(3)(c) zone requirements for the residential type 1B zone indicates that the minimum front yard depth required is 7.0 meters or 23 feet. The applicant is seeking relief to permit a front yard depth of 4.2 meters or 14 feet, whereas the minimum front yard depth requirement applicable to this property is 7.0 meters or 23 feet. Is the applicant or agent present? And if so, do you wish to speak to the application? Josh, did anyone say they were going to be attending this evening?
Through you, Madam Chair, we had no registrations for attendance.
Okay, thank you. And so I guess with the next question, were there any members of the public that wish to speak to this application?
No, through you, Madam Chair, there were not.
Okay, thank you. So I'll turn it over to our Manager of Planning and Development to provide comments about the application. Good evening, Christy.
Good evening, Chair French. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So as Chair has mentioned, this evening before you is application A0821 submitted by Mr. Neufeld. The application is seeking relief from front yard depth. Most important to this application is that there's currently a deck extending from the front of the dwelling unit. The applicant is proposing to remove this deck with stairs and replace it with a permanent attached structure. So in addition to the building, the intent of this is to for use as a mud room. So the setback is not actually being reduced any more than what it is currently with the deck in place. So this application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act. The county engineer, Catfish Creek Conservation Authority and operations staff indicated no concerns, and there were no comments or questions received from the public. So the application was evaluated using the 4 tests for the minor variance as detailed in the report. And based on these 4 tests, I'm satisfied that the variance is minor, it's appropriate, and it conforms to the intent of the official plan and zoning bylaw. Therefore, I'm recommending that the application be approved this evening. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Christy. Before I open it up for questions, Josh, have you received any other communications related to this application?
Through you, Madam Chair, we have not received any additional communications related to the application before us.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions or comments about this? Okay, seeing none, Josh, could you please read the resolution?
That report, Plan 1821, entitled Planning Evaluation Report, Application for Minor Variance A0821 respecting 48 St. Andrews Street, be received by the Committee of Adjustment for information, and that the Committee of Adjustment conducts a public hearing on December 15th, 2021 at approximately 7 p.m. to receive comments from the public respecting the application for minor variance at 48 St. Andrews Street, and further, that the application for minor variance A0821 requesting relief from section 7.3C of the zoning bylaw to permit a front yard depth of 4.2 meters or 14 feet be approved.
Okay, thank you. I need someone to move and someone to second. Member Chapman and Member Charlton, are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Now we'll move on to the next application. Application number A0921 is made by the London District Catholic School Board regarding the property known municipally as 42 South Street East in the town of Aylmer. The applicant is requesting a minor variance from the requirements of the town zoning bylaw number 5799 as amended. The applicant is seeking relief from section 18C, minimum parking requirements for non-residential uses in order to maintain the number of parking spaces currently provided on the site. Is the applicant or agent present? And if so, do you wish to speak to the application? Josh, is the applicant here?
Through you, Madam Chair, the applicant did not register to participate in the public participation meeting this evening.
Okay, thank you. Did any members of the public wish to speak to this application?
Through you, Madam Chair, there were no registrations for this public meeting this evening from the public.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Could the manager of planning and development provide comments about this application? And I'll turn it over to you, Christy.
Thank you, Chair French. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this application, and there are a number of details to consider. So the board received, the school board received funding to support the renovation of Assumption Catholic School to create a childcare space in classrooms that are presently unused. So the proposed renovation would facilitate the creation of 49 new spaces, which includes one infant room, one toddler room, and one preschool room. Based on the change of use that's being proposed, which is the removal of classrooms and the introduction of a childcare facility, the minimum parking requirements changed. Currently, there are 23 regular parking spaces there are 19 regular parking spaces plus one accessible space, so 20 parking spaces on site. The provisions of the zoning bylaw require that 23 regular parking spaces plus 2 accessible spaces be provided to accommodate these new uses. So the relief is basically being requested due to on-site space constraints and the investment that would be required to add parking to the site. So the school board is working within a fairly tight funding envelope. The renovation was approved in 2017, and since then there have been a number of redesigns that have delayed the project. And this is really because the amount of funding hasn't changed with the time that's passed. So they're working, they're trying to do the same amount with essentially fewer today dollars. So the proposal that they've come up with is to reduce the scope of the project to really focus on the inclusion of the childcare facility. However, that comes at the cost of basically not being able to undertake other site works at this time. So the application was circulated in accordance with provisions of the Planning Act. The county engineer, Catfish Creek Conservation Authority, both indicated there were no concerns with the application. The town fire chief did indicate that both Aylmer Fire and Aylmer Police have received several complaints regarding on-street parking on both sides of South Street East, and have noted that the fire route is currently being used for pickup and drop off. Town operations staff, we received comments after the report was published, but they have indicated that an independent evaluation of the site from a traffic consultant with recommendations would be favorable. I did receive one supplementary question, and it was why a reduction in parking spaces would be supported when it appears that some staff may be required to park on the street. No comments or questions were otherwise received from the public. So based on the comments received, I think it's important to differentiate and separate the request for relief from parking requirements from existing off-site traffic management concerns. As the committee is aware, town staff are evaluating road safety concerns at another school in town, and there's really an opportunity to extend implementation of any recommended measures to other schools. So ultimately, the addition of the required 5 on-site parking spaces that we're seeking relief from is not likely to mitigate any off-site traffic management concerns. However, the introduction of the childcare facility may result in off-site impacts not associated with the requested relief. So town staff have committed to continuing to work with the board regarding staff, and they have indicated that the town can expect subsequent applications that do look at the fire route and the rest of the property. But right now, the core focus is really getting that childcare facility in place. So this application was evaluated using the 4 tests for a minor variance as provided within the Planning Act. The first test is whether or not the variance could be considered minor, and I'm satisfied that relief in the amount of 5 parking spaces is requested. This is based on the position that there are actually greater impacts from not proceeding with the variance. This would include both financial and otherwise. So we would be looking at requiring an updated site plan amendment and agreement, which means new stormwater management design, addition of impervious surface, and ultimately taking away play space from the students. And those seem to be greater impacts than the relief from the 5 parking spaces. So the second test is the variance and appropriate use of the land. The requested variance from the parking requirements would facilitate a use of the land that is appropriate and really in the public interest. The third test is, does the variance maintain the intent of the official plan? This parcel is located within a low-density residential land use designation, which typically permits residential uses. However, there is a caveat that land uses that are considered compatible and serve the need of local residents are also permitted. So the primary use of land is established as an elementary school, and it was established in keeping with the location and design criteria for institutional uses that are outlined in the official plan. The introduction of a childcare facility would not compromise the intent of the official plan and is also permitted within the town zoning bylaw. So the final question, or the final test, is, does the variance maintain the intent of the zoning bylaw? And the intent of establishing minimum parking requirements is really to provide sufficient dedicated on-site space for vehicle parking in order to reduce potential off-site impacts such as traffic and congestion. And again, going back to that differentiation, the parking on-site is really intended to accommodate daytime continuous users of the site, not necessarily all, but it's provided as more of an amenity than a fulsome requirement. It's not, the on-site parking is really not intended to accommodate the limited duration peak hour traffic movements by periodic users of the site. I do believe that the proposal maintains a reasonable number of on-site parking spaces to serve the daytime users of the site, although there may be staff that are required to park off-site. On-site parking management is really within the purview of the school board and how they manage and allocate those spaces. However, I do believe that there is a sufficient number provided on site. So based on the above, the recommendation before the committee this evening is that the application be approved, and informally that staff continue to work with London District Catholic School Board and our municipal partners basically to continue to review and implement whatever changes may be necessary to help encourage or educate some alternative active transportation to our local schools.
Okay, thank you, Christy. Has the clerk received any communications related to this application?
Through you, Madam Chair, the only communications that were received related to this application before us were informal, and they were addressed by the Manager of Planning and Development during the overview of the report.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Are there any questions or comments? Councillor Barber and then Councillor Oslach.
Thank you, Chairman French. And my concern is on the parking. For those that aren't familiar with the area, the main concern is at dismissal time in the afternoon. Parents that are picking up their kids are parking on both sides of the street, actually reducing the traffic flow on South Street to one lane. If anything out of the ordinary were to happen significantly in that area, it's a mess, because a car to pass another car actually has to go into the an empty parking spot and allow the other vehicle to go through. I would take the board up on their offer to have a traffic consultant prepare a report in conjunction with the review that town staff are doing on the one school, and spread it out to the other schools where traffic is an issue. We just can't turn a blind eye to the congestion. It has to be addressed somehow. Appreciating that staff may or may not be able to park on the road. It isn't necessarily the staff at the present time, it's the volume of traffic that's there for a short period of time, but it really does cause a bottleneck in the area. So let's try and do something to alleviate the problem rather than just build on it. My comments, and thank you.
Thank you, Member Barber. Go ahead, Member Oslach.
Your Worship, I further with Councillor Barber's comments. We had the same situation at McGregor School a few years ago, and at that time, the Director of Operations revisited the whole McGregor parking and school bus parking problem, and we have facilitated that, and we can do the same thing with Assumption, I'm sure. But I also congratulate Assumption for forming another childcare facility in Elmer, and we need that childcare facility. We have one other at a church, but we need the childcare facilities really needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Oslach. Are there any other comments or questions? Go ahead, Member Chapman. I believe you're on mute.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I grew up in that area, so the traffic congestion has been there for years and years. And the concern is that by adding the daycare, that it's going to make the problem worse. And as much as I want the daycare spaces, I'm concerned about traffic flow and accidents happening in that area. So I agree that a traffic study needs to be done. And if we can find a way to make it easier to flow through that area, it would be fantastic.
Okay, thank you. Member Barber, go ahead.
Thank you. Is there a way to add a condition onto a minor variance in that the traffic consultant prepare a report?
Christy, could you please answer that question for Member Barber, please?
Yes, through you, Chair. There is a the possibility of adding a condition into the minor variance. However, based on the feedback that I'm hearing, I do maintain that the off-site impacts and the on-site variance are kind of two separate matters that should be considered. I appreciate that there are longstanding concerns. We're seeing it across all the schools in the town. The caution I have with conditioning the approval of the variance on a traffic study is that we didn't require a traffic study at Davenport or McGregor at the expense of the school board. We have been taking other measures. So we're looking at whether there's an educational campaign that could be initiated to facilitate some behavioral change. If the implementation of signage is, a potential mitigator of some of the traffic issues. And then finally, if there is any potential infrastructure improvements that could be made. So I would advise that, or I would recommend that it's a little premature to jump right into going to a traffic consultant if we haven't tried anything else first. I really think there's an opportunity to capitalize on behavioral change. It's a little challenging in the winter particularly, but as we get into spring and the weather gets nicer, I do think there is an opportunity to work with both Thames Valley District School Board, London District Catholic School Board, Student Transportation Services of Southwestern Ontario, and the town to come up with some more, dedicated walking routes, ways that get people out of their cars and pursue alternative modes of travel. So we can condition an approval. However, in this case, I think it would be premature.
Okay, thank you, Christy. Member Barber, go ahead.
Thank you. A follow-up to my question, then, if that's the resolution to the issue, who's going to drive it? Is it just going to magically happen, or where is the direction coming from?
Christy, could you answer that, please?
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Member Barber, for your question. I can advise that both myself and the Director of Operations are currently working on evaluating the results of the road safety survey that we undertook at Davenport. So we are looking at what the issues identified were. We're looking at what the preferred recommendations of that community are. And we're taking that back and considering, implementation timelines, budgetary constraints, responsibilities of landowners versus the community. So I think, perhaps formal direction is not necessarily required. We're reporting back on the Davenport situation early in the new year. And within the scope of that report, we can include a recommendation that we explore opportunities to apply the same at other schools across town where similar issues may have been raised or concerns exist presently.
Okay, thank you, Christy. Are there any further questions? Is everyone satisfied with the explanations that Christy's given? And you understand everything? Okay, I guess if there's no further discussion, Josh, could you read the resolution, please?
Certainly, through you, Madam Chair. That report plan 1921 entitled Planning Evaluation Report, application for minor variance A0921 respecting 42 South Street East be received by the Committee of Adjustment for information, and that the Committee of Adjustment conduct a public hearing on December 15th, 2021 at approximately 7 p.m. to receive comments from the public regarding the application for minor variance on 42 South Street East, and further that the application for minor variance A0921 respecting relief from section 18C minimum parking requirements for non-residential uses to permit the provision of 20 on-site parking spaces be approved.
Okay, thank you. Someone to move and someone to second? Member Andrews and Member Chapman. All those in favor? And that's carried. Opposed? I guess I didn't see your opposed, Member Barber. Okay, sorry, I missed that. It's hard sometimes to see everybody's hands, and I apologize for that. Josh, could you please read the resolution to adjourn the committee hearing?
That the Committee of Adjustment hearing is adjourned at 7:34 p.m.
Okay, someone to move and someone to second. Councillor Oslach and Councillor Chapman. Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. And we'll now reconvene council. So could you please read the resolution, Josh?
That the council meeting be reconvened at 7:34 p.m.
Okay, someone to move and someone to second. Councillor Chapman and Councillor Charlton. Questions or comments? All those in favor? And that's carried. The next item up is adoption of council and committee minutes. Minutes to approve.
That council approves the following minutes. Regular virtual meeting of council held on December 1st, 2021.
Okay, someone to move and someone to second. Deputy Mayor Andrews and Councillor Barber. Questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. The next item up is the consent agenda.
That item 7.1 to 7.3, it being noted that 7.3 was added, of the December 15th, 2021 consent agenda be received as information with actions to be taken as noted.
Okay, someone to move and someone to second. Councillor Oslach and Councillor Charlton. And I'll just open it up. Are there any items on the consent agenda that anyone would like to speak to? Okay, we'll start with Councillor Barber and then Councillor Oslach.
Thank you, Worship. I would just like on item number 7.1, your election as Warden of Elgin County. On behalf of, I hope I'm speaking for the rest of council, congratulating you on your win. We know you'll do a great job, and if members of council can do anything to support you in that endeavor, just give us a shout.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate that. And I'll do my best. Are there any other items? I guess you did have your hand up, Councillor Oslach. Go ahead.
Yes, Your Worship. I was going to congratulate you too, but Councillor Barber beat me to it.
Well, thank you.
Yes, I like to speak on 7.3.
Okay.
Yeah, the amendment that was added to the agenda.
Certainly.
And, basically, under the new Conservation Act, the province brought in a couple of years ago. They changed the mandated programs, the non-mandated programs, and also the other sources of revenue. And we have to concentrate on the mandated programs. That's to do with the municipalities. We have 5 municipalities, and they all provide us funding on the levy, and we get around $300,000 a year from the 5 municipalities. But the province wants us to concentrate on that mandatory. And this is why we dispense with the Maple Syrup Festival, because that's non-mandatory. And also we receive from non-mandatory programs and other sources of revenue about 25% of our income, our revenue for the authority. And doing away with that 25% would leave us in jeopardy, very serious jeopardy. And basically, we're trying to work with the province, and all the authorities have met with the province over the last 2 years to hammer out all the details. And basically, we come up with a transitional phase that will be completed in 2024. And as you see in the report, the timeline is there. And basically, we're trying to, like mandatory programs is like source protection, water source protection, and Lake Erie shore protection, things like that. And this is mandatory. But non-mandatory things is like education for school children. Like 2 years ago, we had 50 buses and 500 kids in Springwater to teach them wildlife and woodlore, and we had demonstrations for raccoons and squirrels and snakes and amphibians and everything else. We also had the taking them through the trails and identify trees and plants and animals if we could see them, and birds. Basically, it's an educational thing, And the province wants us to concentrate on mandatory programs, and we're working it out with the province. And this is why we have to provide an inventory to the municipalities of what we're doing, and this will be coming within this transition 2024. That's it.
Thank you, Councillor Oslach. Are there any other questions or comments concerning the consent agenda? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. We'll move into action items. The first one up is there's a request for a letter of support from Aylmer, and I believe one of our councillors has asked to have this put on the agenda. So Josh, if you could read the resolution, please.
Certainly, through you, your worship, I'll read the resolution. It was, as you had noted, at the request of Councillor Oslach. Whereas the province of Ontario has the most expensive childcare in the country, presenting a financial hardship for many families and a barrier for women's full economic participation. And whereas the $34 billion early learning and childcare spending commitment announced this year by the federal government will bring transformative change to childcare by lowering parent fees and expanding the supply of regulated, not-for-profit, and public childcare in this country. And whereas the federal government has already reached childcare agreements with British Columbia, Nova Scotia, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Yukon Territory, Prince Edward Island, Newfoundland, and Labrador, and Quebec. And whereas the provisions of each agreement vary to some degree, but the majority of the jurisdictions have agreed to use the federal funds to A, lower parent fees by 50% by the end of 2022, and to $10 a day by 2025 or 26 or sooner, and B, to improve the wages and working conditions of early childhood educators, and C, to publicly fund the expansion of not-for-profit and public childcare. Therefore, be it resolved that the town of Aylmer supports the city of St. Catharines' request that the provincial government take the necessary steps to work with the federal government on a bilateral agreement to ensure the new national childcare program be made available to Ontarians, and that it focuses on increased access, affordability, quality, and responsiveness, all of which are essential to the COVID-19 pandemic response. And be it further resolved that the town council requests the clerk to circulate council's decision to the office of the Premier of Ontario.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Someone to move and someone to second. Deputy Mayor Andrews and Councillor Oslach. Is there any discussion concerning this? Councillor Barber, go ahead, and then Councillor Oslach, you'll be next.
Thank you, Worship. A friendly amendment New Brunswick signed in either yesterday or the day before that, if you want to include them in the resolution.
Thank you, Councillor Barber. Go ahead, Councillor Oslach.
Yes, Your Worship. I put this on the agenda because it was very important to, it's not important to me because I'm an old senior, but it's important. You laugh. Anyway, it's important to all the young parents in our municipality, and childcare is a very expensive proposition. This is why I put it on the agenda, and I think we should support this wholeheartedly.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Oslach. Are there any further comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. The next item up is Report Plan 2021.
That Report Plan 2021, entitled Implementation of a Parkland Dedication Bylaw, be received for information, and that Council approves the recommendation for a Parkland Dedication Bylaw as outlined in the Report Plan 2021, and further that Council directs staff to include a Parkland Dedication Bylaw, being a bylaw to provide for the conveyance for land for purposes or cash in lieu of parkland conveyance for consideration at a future regular virtual meeting of Council.
Okay, thank you. Someone to move and someone to second. Councillor Charlton and Councillor Chapman. Christy, did you have any comments on this report?
Thank you, Mayor French. Just briefly, the the report before you this evening is just introducing and implementing bylaw to reflect legislative direction that's within the Planning Act and already contained within the town's official plan. Previous staff had committed to bringing forward a parkland dedication bylaw at the time of the next development charges bylaw. So we're following through on that commitment. The bylaw has been drafted and is appended to tonight's agenda just for review, open to feedback and any additional considerations that council may have. What the main takeaway is that the bylaw recommends the rates consistent with those outlined in the Planning Act at 2% and 5%, but also includes an incremental flat rate for cash in lieu for consents. This would be a new charge and is intended to eliminate the need for landowners to undertake appraisals when going through the consent process. So again, open to any feedback or comments over the next few weeks. We'd be happy to bring back a finalized draft in the new year. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Christy. Are there any questions for Christy about this? Councillor Oslach and then Councillor Charlton will be next.
Yes, Your Worship, to Christy. It's important to provide green spaces for recreational and nature habit in the town of Aylmer. And we're fortunate that we have a lot of parks in Aylmer. And I think last count, we had several almost 100 acres of parks in Aylmer. Don't quote me on that, but we're fortunate to have a lot of green spaces, and I think it's important to keep them. And I slowly report the support this resolution, these bylaws.
Thank you, Councillor Oslach. Go ahead, Councillor Charlton.
Through your worship to Christy, I'm just not understanding the in lieu of cash phrase. Does that mean a developer could buy his way out of providing green space in a subdivision, or just, I'm just not understanding that part of it.
If I may, Mayor French?
Yes, go ahead, Christy.
And through you to Councillor Charlton, thank you for that question. So typically in subdivisions, it's not as common as when we see non-residential development. So say we were reviewing a site plan in the industrial area, there would be a requirement for 2% of the total land area to be dedicated. However, if we were to introduce a park in that area, it would be fragmented from the rest of our system and may not be beneficial to different user groups. So in those instances, it's better for the town to collect the cash in lieu. So the value of what that land they would have provided us is given to us and held in reserve so that we can consolidate all those little chunks of money we pick up across town as development occurs so that we can build consolidated parks in appropriate locations that serve the whole community instead of having a bunch of little quarter-acre parks all over town that our Parks and Rec team would have to support over time. Just bringing those together through holding the funds in reserve until a time that it's appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
I'll have Councillor Barber speak first and then Councillor Oslach. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. To Christy, if I may. Christy, is this just bringing provisions from the Planning Act, excuse me, from the Planning Act that have been there for years and bringing into a zoning bylaw?
So if I may, Your Worship?
Go ahead, Christy.
Through you to Councillor Barber. Yes, these provisions have been in place. The direction is based in the Planning Act. It's also been in our official plan for a number of years, I think since its original inception in '99. So what this bylaw does is just give us that implementing mechanism that allows us to put that condition into our development agreements that we are now collecting. We've had the policy, we just haven't had that legislative basis. So this will be a standalone bylaw. It won't be included in our zoning bylaw, similar to what you would see in our development charges bylaw. So I would say that's the most directly comparable, although parkland dedication is not included within the scope of development charges.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Oslach, did you have a comment?
Yes, Your Worship. I apologize for my speech tonight because I have a very sore tooth and it's affecting my vocabulary.
Oh, that's okay.
Sorry.
Thanks for letting us know. Are there any other comments this evening? And does everybody understand what we're doing here this evening? Councillor Charlton, you seem like you may have another question.
Well, I was just kind of concerned that, say, a subdivision like Cottonwood, they could, if they're supposed to provide so much parkland or green space in that subdivision, it would, there'd be more money in it if they could turn that land into a few more housing lots. And I just wouldn't want that to happen. So I wouldn't want developers to be able to buy themselves out of a situation where they should provide green space or parkland and various subdivisions or areas wouldn't have it. I understand the part about industrial land, but I just wouldn't want to shortchange the residential areas. So that's all. Thank you.
Christy, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Charlton, it is at the town's full discretion whether or not we accept cash in lieu. It is for Cottonwood, for instance, they have provided a significant amount of parkland dedication within their first phase. So they've actually oversupplied beyond the 5% requirement for the total lot area of phase 2, and that will be credited against future phases. So instead of doing a cash in lieu, they're giving you one big park instead of 3 separate smaller parks that would be more resource intensive for the town to maintain in the long run as the parkland is eventually conveyed to us. So that would be the primary preference of me as a planner, is to have those parks in residential areas. That does make the most sense. It's just really in those instances, say we were looking at a 3-lot or a 6-lot subdivision, it may not be realistic to include 5% of that land area as parkland. We're certainly not going to give the developers an out. It's really to our discretion and to the town's greatest benefit that will be applied in each individual instance.
Okay, thank you.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Charlton?
Yes, thank you very much. That's good.
You're welcome. Are there any other concerns or questions? Go ahead, Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Your Worship. So that was my concern as well, is who makes the decision on whether they give the parkland or in lieu of. But thank you, Chrissy, that answered it very well. And it makes sense if you're only going to have a small group of houses, to have a little tiny park that achieves nothing, to take the money in lieu of and put it towards the larger parks. So I like this idea.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Chapman. Any further questions or comments? I think the key thing we have to take away from this is the fact that it's already been in the official plan. It's just that it's not been a standalone bylaw. And I think this is going to make it a lot clearer for our developers. So when we have standalone bylaws, it's just much more streamlined. And as we've all been saying all along during this last 3 years of our council term, we're really trying to streamline the way we do business. And so I commend our staff for bringing forth these types of things, because it's certainly going to make it a lot easier for people to understand. So thank you so much, Christy. With no further questions or comments, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. The next report is Plan 2121.
That report, Plan 2121, entitled Informational Report, Update on Delegated Authority Approvals for Site Plan Control Applications in 2021 Planning Approvals, be received for information.
Okay, someone to move and someone to second. Councillor Chapman and Councillor Charlton. And I'll turn this back over to you, Christy, if you have any further information.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. This report is just following up again on a staff commitment. One delegated authority was provided to myself in October. We indicated that we would routinely update council with the status of what had been approved under delegated authority and what was being considered. So I'm pleased to provide this update. It's a bit of a good news story to cap off the year for planning. One update that I have subsequent to the authoring of this report is that we are nearing approval with a development agreement for 335 John Street. So we anticipate that there will be earth moving on that site early in the new year. Overall, we are looking at through the completion of site plans and other significant residential projects that were progressed in 2021, the town is positioned to add 155 new residential units. And what's really fantastic about this is that not only is it 155 new residential units to town, it includes both rental and freehold tenure types, as well as a range of products. So we're looking at developments that have singles, semis, towns, and apartments. So really it doesn't get much better than this in terms of residential development. We do anticipate that 2022 will bring a flurry of activity in terms of non-residential development. And that's really due to the town initiated land sales. We're seeing some inquiries starting to build on what the development potential is there, as well as just general market activity. So overall, good news story, and happy to answer any questions that council may have.
Are there any questions for Christy? Well, it's certainly a good news story. You couldn't ask for much better, and I really appreciate the fact that we're going to be having all types of housing available. So that's great news. With no further comments or questions, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. The next report is Finance 0621.
That report, Finance 0621, entitled Tax Write-Off Report 2021, final, be received for information. And further, that council acknowledges the changes to the 2021 tax rolls as outlined in the Schedule A, as the 2021 tax write-offs approved under the Municipal Act for the year end 2021.
Okay, someone to move and someone to second. Deputy Mayor Andrews and Councillor Barber. Good evening, Heather. I'll turn it over to you. Maybe you can give us a little bit more information about this report. We can't hear you, Heather. I don't know if you're on mute or.
Mayor French, if I may, it's Josh.
Yeah, okay, Josh.
I'm just wondering if it may be worthwhile for us just to move ahead to item 8.5 and just to return to 8.4 to allow Heather some time.
Certainly. So we'll just move up to, I believe the next one is report CAO 7121. Is that the correct one, Josh?
Yes, and we'll hold the mover and the seconder for the previous report, Finance 0621. Just it being noted that the mover was Deputy Mayor Andrews and this seconder was Councillor Barber.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll just read aloud the resolution for report CAO 7121, and it's that report CAO 7121, respecting the preliminary 2022 levy budget, be received as information.
Okay, someone to move and someone to second. Councillor Oslach and Councillor Chapman. Is there any further information about this report, I guess, from Andy?
Sure. Just thank you, Mayor French. Before I start, Heather, can you try your mic again? Yeah, we can't hear you still, Heather. So, all right. So I'll provide some introductory remarks, and then I'll ask our treasurer to hop on and provide an overview for council. I've already gone over these for Heather, so she knows what I'm going to say. The focus of the 2022 budget really has been improvements to our timelines, processes, and collaboration, both internally and with the community. To provide a relatable example for the viewing public, We've changed our timelines for budgeting so that we know what our funding is earlier in the year. This allows us to better enact council's vision and enables us to provide quicker year ends, audits, and variance reporting. This in turn allows council and the public to see how we're performing closer to real time and improves our financial transparency and accountability. So this is just one example of an improvement. However, when we begin discussing the budget, the dialogue usually switches and focuses to levy impact. So I don't want to lose sight that we've adopted a culture of continuous improvement in the town that will serve us well in this budget as well as in future ones. We heard from the public that the majority of our survey respondents wanted an affordability budget this year without cutting services. Our key pressures of inflation, negative levy assessment, annualization of the waste contract, and labor costs are hard numbers that really limited our options. So the management team went through this budget line by line multiple times to find efficiencies and reductions. The outcome is that staff are very confident that this budget is very close to what we need for our operations in 2022, and we've removed the margins and paddings that we've had in previous years. The proposed increase equates to less than $5 per month on the average home. Beyond this budget, I clearly believe that council has made strategic decisions that will benefit residents over the term of the next council. You just heard Christy talking about all the new units that are going to be built here. That's growth like Elmer's never seen before. And the investment in growth and expansion of our assessment base is really the way forward to provide the community with options for increased affordable budgets in the future. The new water tower, the expansion of the wastewater treatment plant, the new industrial park, and all the new residential developments are instruments of significant growth. Council's new development charges, water and wastewater rates, and user fees ensure that funding for this growth will be shifted from the tax levy to user pay. Before I hand it over to the treasurer too, I do want to highlight that we've already really whittled this operational budget down by half from where we were starting earlier. We started at 6.5%, and we don't see too many options to cut further without impacting services. The one item that council may desire to consider is the removal of transfers to parks reserves of $20,000. This item wouldn't impact our operations, but it would have a capital impacts on our future capital project funding. But it was removed from the 2021 budget. We did put it back in this budget. So that's something that council could consider that would add an additional $20,000 cut. Council could assign an amount from the council initiatives reserve to offset the levy. However, staff feel, given the current rate of inflation, that the proposed 3.22% increase is a reasonable increase. There's just over 78,000 in the council initiatives reserve. And it's important to note that this reserve was provided to allow council more options in terms of one-time initiatives. So ideally, staff would like to not see this fund utilized to offset the levy. If council does decide to access it, staff would like to see council maintain at least half of this fund in 2022, as there are several projects that may be requesting DC exemptions in 2022 for things like affordable housing or community improvements. So we wouldn't want to see council deplete this reserve to provide a one-time benefit to ratepayers and then not have options to back unique projects in 2022. Again, 2022 is an exceptional year where assessment is over $250,000 less than 2021 due to multi-year tax appeals outcomes. So I don't think we're ever going to see another year where we have a negative assessment and take that hit. And it's an experience that other municipalities around us haven't seen. And when you look at the potential for us to add 150 units starting next year, we know those units will take multiple years to start hitting the tax rolls because we get the funding when occupancy occurs. And so we do know that things are going to significantly improve starting towards the end of 2022, and then we'll see the real impacts in 2023 and 2024. So just to highlight, our starting point of 6.5 in this budget wasn't due to a lot of additional add-ons. It just really represents that Elmer's budget situation in 2022 was represented a uniquely bad starting point that we won't encounter again for many years. I mentioned in our September overview of the public survey that I wouldn't refer to the county budget process, so I'm going to break my own commitment. We know that the county is likely to end at a budget amount at around our proposed one or higher. In 2022, the larger portion of our tax increase was taken by the county, and my expectation is that could likely occur again in 2022. So as council knows, we provide roughly 60 to 80% of the services to residents in Aylmer. So it's hard to see how our increases can be lower than the county's year over year. Similarly, we find that the average ratepayer often doesn't distinguish between the counties and the town's rates. So even if the council goes to great lengths to reduce the 3.22%, that goodwill they will receive for this will likely evaporate when people receive the tax bill. So very few residents are actually going to be able to discern our additional efforts for restraint. Council could also give further review to grant funding, as our new application process indicates that some bodies have very substantial reserves, and one annually appears to be making a profit that exceeds our contribution amount. So essentially, we're giving one body money and it's just going into their profits. That is, however, a challenging road to take, as we know volunteerism is down. And we don't want to damage our relationships with local institutions. But the reality is that there are ones there that we know will not be adversely impacted if we do not provide that funding next year. And the fact that staff are mentioning this option, I hope just goes to show that we've really held nothing sacred in this budget process, and we've had every tough discussion about everything we do. We don't want to cut or don't want to lose really with staff. And with that, I'll hand it over to Heather, and I hope her microphone is working now.
Okay, I called in. I hope everybody can hear me. I apologize. So I will start here with the notes that we went through. So reflecting on the past 8 months, we have come a long way to this point. So not soon after council had passed the 2021 budget, or soon after the council had passed the 2021 budget, we started looking at ways to improve 2022 through public engagement, clarity, transparency, and to improve the future budgeting processes. Although this budget document is a work in progress, it summarizes the adjustments in by department, including the pressures, reductions, efficiencies found in each area. The departmental spending templates were actually sent to the directors to receive feedback and input to be consolidated into the budget you have in front of you. So each director collaborated with their management, their staff, and all their respective departments, compiling a list of ideas for improvements, which would help us reduce the cost line by line in the budget for council consideration. So some of these ideas were easily implemented for 2022. So for user fees, all the user fees were adjusted to offset some of the additional costs presented to council in prior meetings. Other ideas included abandoning the dog tag program, creating the grants and donation application package to ensure there's a formal process that's fair for all applicants. And with the talent that council has been able to attract and retain, we now have in-house expertise to offer planning, review, and consultation services for a reasonable fee. Staff and council also have accelerated the plans for the industrial and residential growth, which are essential for our future generations and sustainability. So I should have been able to present the tax write-off, which would have been a great segue into this, but overall our tax write-offs, SUPs and omits net in about a $96,000 hit for that have been materialized in 2021. So as you can see from the full agenda throughout the year, we've been focusing on building and planning and economic development, and it's still at the forefront as we are winding down to 2021. While we're anticipating a sizable increase in number of units and therefore generating future tax revenue in many forms, the revenue from these developments won't be entirely realized in 2022. So we're hoping to see a few of these roles established in 2022, but the subs won't probably generate until late next year. So council and staff have already worked through establishing the water rates, wastewater rates, DC study with Watson, and preparing the capital budget ahead of this operating budget, so we can use these inputs for forecasting. With the amount of effort that we put into these studies, we will see the future benefit as these rates are updated and offset for future burden from aging infrastructure, and we will be able to properly fund the future growth that we can see forecasted in these studies. So if we start on the summary page, the overall changes to the grants and revenues include an increase of general revenue of $34,000 for funding. And we also have the police chief is targeting $78,000 worth of grants that is new for 2022. We have had an increase in obligatory grants, including $10,000 for the Community Building Fund, Canada Community Building Fund, which is formerly known as gas tax. Also, we just noticed last week that we had an email from the ministry or the province saying that the OSIF had doubled. So while these are obligatory and they go directly into reserves, and until we have a project that we can apply them to, it's all great news for the town. So the majority, going down further, the majority of changes in user fees were correction of water rates and wastewater rates with volume increases compared to the last study, which was done several years ago. And the only lost revenue we have in this area would be for a terminated building lease, as we're all aware, in 2021 of $14,000. So on the material and supply side, we're seeing the reciprocal changes happening for $432,000 with the correction of the primary and secondary water purchase volume, along with the rate adjustments, which haven't been updated again since I mentioned a few years ago. So with the correction of all these water revenues and these water purchases, we will make up the expenses that offset through revenue. The remainder of the changes in each department include an increase to building maintenance and repairs of $35,000, training expenses, tuition, workshops of $35,000, a small increase to association fees, and a small increase in land expense, which is offset by land sales. So overall, in the contracted services, there's an increase of $94,000. Primarily made up of the waste contract of approximately $84,000 and 3% for contracted services related to water and wastewater. Overall changes for our transfer to own funds include the obligatory funds, which I mentioned, OSIF and the CCBF, which are a total of $317,000 incremental for OSIF and $10,000 for the CCBF. And then the $20,000 contribution to reserves, which Andy had mentioned. And then, of course, the remainders, the water and wastewater sewer rates causing the increase to reserve. So pending external board approval, with expecting no change, incremental operating costs for EECC and police services to this point. Police services have been targeting, as I said, those grants to offset incremental operating costs. And for fire services, we're hoping that council approve an incremental volunteer firefighter for 2022, as identified in a report brought forward to council last year. It takes a while to train and onboard a new volunteer, and we're anticipating retirement. So finally, we understand the financial pressures of family on the community, of each family in the community, and we're understanding that they're extremely hard to bear, especially having gone through the struggles of the pandemic. So we're looking to levy the $6.18 million for 2022, and we've suggested the 3.22 increase with looking for direction from council, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Heather. Are there any questions for Heather? Councillor Oslach and then Councillor Charlton. Go ahead, Councillor Oslach.
Yes, Your Worship. To Heather, what is one tax point? I understand it's went up.
So 61,000 approximately.
It used to be 50,000, right?
Last year was 59,000.
59,000, okay. And further to the question, Andy alluded to the $5 a month increase on residential homes. Is that appropriate, or is it in stone?
We're looking for direction from council to see if you wanted to remove anything from what we're trying to levy, but at this point right now, the only contributions that we can remove, as Andy mentioned, are what we're looking at are the parkland for council consideration, 20,000. And if council wants to use their initiatives reserve even to offset some of the grants that are coming up for discussion for approval for this the remainder of this budget meeting, you can take some of your council initiatives reserve and pay for some of these grants if you would like to offset some of that levy.
Okay, so if the tax point is 60,000 and we only have 70,000 in the initiative and 20,000 in parks, it doesn't make sense to remove these things, because for one tax point, we can remove them for a half a tax point and still have some functioning money in that, but I don't see the necessary of tapping those funds, basically.
I think 3.22% is reasonable considering all of the points that we've brought up with inflation and everything else. But like I said, we're looking for council direction. So if there's anything that you guys wanted to change, we're open to feedback at this point.
Thank you, Heather.
Councillor Chapman, did you have a comment?
Yes, I was going through the financial report and I saw something that was a little big. So in the summary for total administration materials and supplies, it was like 432,000. And so if you get down to the waterworks, there's 342,000 there. And I just wondered what was included in that. Did we hire somebody, or did we buy a boat to cruise around the lagoons, or could you explain that just a little further, that 342, please?
Yeah. Just let me pull up the detail here. So the 432,000, 352 was the water purchases. So again, these water purchases weren't updated as they maybe should have been with the revenues since the past water and wastewater study. The additional costs, so those revenues that we have now trued up and the expenses we have now trued up will offset and net out on the water detailed page to zero. So that's kind of where you're seeing these numbers are being skewed because of the water and wastewater rates, how they're presented on the summary tab. So we have included the water and wastewater summaries in this budget file so that you can see the detail, and the majority of the purchases for water are lifting up that 432,000. So I mentioned it briefly, but now that you've pointed out, so the remainder of the changes in that overall summary are 35,000 for building repairs and maintenance, and then we had another 35,000 for tuition, training expenses, workshops, and then of course hiring designated individuals comes with a cost of association fees. So there's an increase in association fees and a small increase to land sale expense that is apparent in that summary tab. So as you work through the smaller departmental budgets, you'll be able to see those the detail, but the summary tab is definitely giving you a different picture from the detail for sure.
Good, thank you, great answer.
Councillor Barber, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I believe that we should leave the council initiative there, pending any applications for it. If it isn't used, it'll roll over into next year anyway. And as far as the community groups go, I believe that their submissions were appropriate, and they need the money to foster their programs and or develop. So I would be supportive in approving those as they are. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Andrews.
Thank you. Just a comment from me. I would agree with Councillor Barber in this instance. I think that we should leave everything as is. You know, it's always a request that we reduce our taxes, but not reduce our services. I think our town is blessed with amazing services, right down to, you know, garbage collection, you know, our junk garbage week pickup, like those little things that just make our town, you know, just stand out and just a really good place to live, right up to fire services and police services. I think that we should just leave the reserves, everything as is. We should just leave the budget as presented. And like I say, I agree with Councillor Barber that you know, it'd be great to go through and look at the service groups that are looking, but it's been a very challenging year. And maybe it's something that we can look at in next year's.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Andrews. Are there any other comments or questions? Okay, so I'll turn it back to staff. Do you have anything further to add? And are you satisfied with what council has directed? Like, is there anything further you need to discuss?
Through you, Chair French. No, I think that's we've kind of heard the direction of council. Certainly, if there is anything that you want us to investigate further, we aren't asking council to make a decision on the budget tonight, but we do appreciate knowing if there's further work for us to do upon it. And certainly we've heard that it is, you know, our work to date has been valued, and we will present the budget at the second meeting in January, and we will have the bylaw there if there isn't any substantive changes. So I think that's our plan to go forward.
Okay, thank you, Andy, and thank you, Heather. With no further questions or comments, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. And Josh, we will go back to the other report that Heather was going to present. So
certainly, through your worship, just for the benefit of council, I'll reread the resolution. This was moved by Deputy Mayor Andrews, seconded by Councillor Barber. That report finance 0621 entitled Tax Write-Off Report 2021 be received for information, and that council acknowledges the changes to the 2021 tax rolls as outlined in Schedule A as the 2021 tax write-offs approved under the Municipal Act for the year end 2021.
Okay, thank you for that, Josh. And Heather, if you have anything further to add, I don't know if you do, but.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I apologize again for my audio or my mic. So basically, we had already seen this report come forward in September, and the reason why I did pull it forward, again, because of the substantial write-offs in 2021. I wanted it to be transparent and upfront with council that we have our challenges before year end even hit. So basically, I just wanted to send this report. This is a final tax write-off. It's an incremental amount of $18,000. Overall, like I said in the budget report, it is an incremental impact overall of $96,000 with the subs and omits. So I think it's a little more manageable than what we originally thought in September. Now that we have all these building permits coming in and the planning and building departments working diligently to try to get some of these things resolved before the cutoff for MPAC, which was October 29th. So that's all I had to add. So I can answer any questions if anybody has any other questions.
Okay, thank you, Heather. Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. The next report is Clerk 4421.
That report clerk 4421 respecting communities in bloom, doors open participation analysis be received for information, and further that council directs staff to include funds intended for the communities in bloom and doors open participation in the 2023 operational budget for future consideration during budget deliberation.
Okay, someone to move and someone to second. Councillor Chapman and Deputy Mayor Andrews. Josh, did you have anything further you wanted to add to your report? It's quite a good report, and it gives a lot of information, so I'm not sure if you have anything extra to add.
Through your worship, I'll keep it brief. At council's request, staff undertook a review of both of the programs. Throughout that review, we were, we were sort of interested in considering what benefits the type of programming would bring to the town when we trade them off with sort of the costs that we would incur. The main point at this point in the stage is that we've noticed that the programs are largely taking place virtually. So one of the challenges that sort of puts before us is that a lot of the local economic development that would be realized as a result of inviting folks to our community probably wouldn't be relevant at this time, just as a result of some of the COVID-19 restrictions that are in place. So now that staff have had an opportunity rather to assess some of the costs and also to review the program history, we're recommending that a future report be brought to council at the outset of the operating budget for 2023. We're all hopeful that we'll be able to, properly hold these events at that time and sort of reap the entire benefit of the programming if we end up proceeding with the resources that it takes to put it on. And with that, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Josh. Are there any questions or comments? Councillor Oslach, then Councillor Barber, and then Councillor Chapman. Go ahead, Councillor Oslach.
Yes, Your Worship. I was involved with Communities in Bloom and Doors Open for the last 10 years. I think we ended in 2018, roughly, and we forgo that Communities in Blooms earlier. But I'm in favor of putting it off to 2023 because we don't know what this pandemic is going to do with this new variant. I was figuring that we would be out of it by 2022 winter, but this new variant comes in and we're not out of it yet. And the thing is, the future is really, really hard to predict. And I'm in favor of putting it off to 2023. Basically, these programs are a great initiative for the town, and they bring a lot of people to the town. And they're a great initiative, like I said, to promote the town. And it's a really benefit to the town all the way. Communities in Bloom highlights the town to not only the judges, but they spruce up the town for visitors to town. And Doors Open brings, last time I had Doors Open, I think I brought over 900 people to the town of Aylmer. But during this pandemic, like I say, it's hard to visualize anything with 2022, but I'm in favor of putting it off to 2023.
Thank you, Councillor Oslach. Councillor Barber, you're next.
Thank you, Your Worship. I too am not in favor of jumping back into these programs right now. Just want to clarify, though, that we will be providing the $250 fee as a non-evaluated category. So we stay in the program and don't have to start from scratch. Is that correct?
Through you, Your Worship, yes, and to Councillor Barber, yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Chapman. I think you're on mute, Councillor Chapman.
Actually, my screen went for a minute there. Thank you, Your Worship. So through you, I think that waiting until 2023 is a good idea because if it's done virtually, it's not going to bring the volume of visitors that we're looking for. And it would be a nice way to start to promote our town back again and let people realize what a wonderful community we do have. So small town, big heart. Let's show it off in 2023.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Are there any further questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. The next report is Clerk 4821.
That report, Clerk 4821, respecting the Town of Elmer Integrity Commissioner, extension of contract agreement, be received as information, and further that council consider giving 3 readings to the bylaw amending the bylaw 6918, which is as amended by bylaw 4620, to extend the service term for an additional 1 year.
Okay, someone to move and someone to second. Deputy Mayor Andrews and Councillor Barber. This is pretty self-explanatory. Are there any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. And the next report is Clerk 4721.
That report, Clerk 4721, respecting Town of Elmer closed meeting investigator, notice of retirement and appointment, be received for information.
Okay, someone to move and someone to second. Councillor Chapman and Councillor Charlton. Did you have anything further to add to this report, Josh?
Through your worship, nothing at this time.
Okay, are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Now we'll move into new business and matters of urgency. And of course, we have to look at what Councillor Oshlatch brought forth as a notice of motion. So of course, he has already put it on the floor. So I'll have Josh read the resolution and then we'll need someone to second it so we can discuss it.
Whereas the County of Elgin and Ministry of Transportation have jurisdiction and control over the roadways known respectively as John Street, Highway 73, and the Kings Highway 3, Highway 3. And whereas it's the intent of the Council of the Town of Elmer to ensure roadways and intersections within the geographic boundary of Elmer remain safe for residents and visitors of the town, now therefore be it resolved that Council directs staff to initiate the process of investigating the left-hand turn signals and the timing of the pedestrian crosswalk signals at the intersection of Highway 73 and Highway 3 in collaboration with the County of Elgin and the Ministry of Transportation, and further that Council directs staff to provide a follow-up report at a future regular meeting of Council.
Okay, so is there someone that will second this? Councillor Charlton. So I'm going to turn this over back to you, Josh. Is there anything further you'd like to add before we do some more discussion on it?
Through your worship, I've got nothing further to add at this point. I'm hopeful that Rob and I may be able to answer any questions that council may have about the next steps in terms of initiating this this process as put forth by Councillor Oshlatch.
Okay, thank you, Josh. So we'll open it up for questions and comments from our council. Councillor Barber.
Thank you, Worship. I generally support the intent of this particular motion. I just wonder if it is going far enough. The motion indicates 2 evolutions of the stoplights, and it's my opinion that this has been kicked around for a number of years without any results. And rather than just looking at the pedestrian crossing on the one side and the left turn northbound on the other, why don't we have a complete review of the evolutions that happen at that particular intersection and go accordingly from that report on? In other words, can it be better than what the motion is indicating?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Barber, and we'll talk this over a bit more, and then we'll refer back to what you've suggested. Councillor Oshlatch, go ahead.
Yes, I put this motion on the floor basically because I have a number of citizens come complain about the stoplight, the main stoplight, and about the left-hand turn signals, and about the timing of the pedestrian crosswalks. All 4 pedestrian crosswalks and all 4 of the turn signals. left-hand turn signals. And I have been in consultation with Rob Johnson, Director of Operations, and I think he's going to do a full review, a partial review. I talked to him today, and basically Rob is going to do an overall view of the main stoplight, and he's going to bring a consultant in, and basically it will cost quite a bit of money to do a full review, but if it's necessary, I'm assured that Rob will do it. And this is come to council at least twice in my as council terms, and it was more or less slept over and just not reviewed properly. And this is why I brought it back, because this is a main stoplight in town. Since we lost the the bypass, all the trucks come through town, and I noticed that the crosswalks, basically, elderly people with wheelchairs or walkers or canes have a trouble getting across the intersection within timing. And I've noticed also that they almost got hit a few times. I noticed that because I go to Legion every day in the morning, and I stop at the stoplight going north, and basically I have quite a comedian view of the stoplight as it functions normally, but I think we should have a review of that stoplight. So this is why I brought the motion forward.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Oslach. Are there any other comments or questions? So I think, go ahead, Councillor Barber.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to make sure that if we're going to do a review of the stoplights, let's do a complete review of the stoplights. If the southbound left-hand turn can be improved, or the north-south movement of the traffic can be improved, why are we stopping at the two evolutions? That's the only point that I'm trying to make. I don't doubt, I support everything that Councillor Oslach is saying, but if we're going to do it, let's do the whole thing.
Certainly, Councillor Barber. And I think what we're going to do is I will turn it over to Rob Johnson, and hopefully we can come to a conclusion of how to approach this and maybe amend the resolution. I will have Rob speak first, and then Councillor Oslach, after Rob is finished, then you can speak. Go ahead, Rob.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think the resolution identifies some of the pinch points that the people are seeing out there, and Councillor Oslach has witnessed firsthand. The signal timing is not independent of each other. So, for example, when you give a fully protected left turn, everybody else has to stop, which impacts the time a pedestrian has to cross. It also impacts the east-west traffic as well, because the time you do an advanced green followed by a pedestrian crossing, you've really delayed east-west traffic. So all the turning movements are not they're interdependent of each other. So when we look at the review, we'll have to do a full review of the thing. It can't just be of the one left turn. I think the motion speaks to those areas that people are physically seeing and are frustrated with. And I think if I understand the council, we would do sort of a very preliminary overview. I can get some direction and I can see what's going on. Certainly before I was to spend or commission a lot of money, I would be back to council to say, here's where I think we should go. Here's what we're seeing. Do we want to investigate this further? But perhaps there's some really, maybe some simple timing tweaks that could be done. There might be some parking configuration that could be, looked at, eliminating parking, letting some through lanes go. Before I would initiate any of those or further study those, I would be back to council to say we need a little more in depth, if that helps.
Thank you, Rob. Go ahead, Councillor Oslach.
Essentially, Rob said what Your Worship. Rob said what I was going to say. we need more of a comprehensive study of this stoplight. And like I said, Rob is going to use a preliminary study and then come back to council. And then the council will have to recommend whether we spend money on the study or not, because we don't have it in the budget, basically. And we have to find the money in the budget. I talked to Andy about that, and he was saying that basically we would have to find the money in the budget. Anyway, that's my thoughts.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Oslich. Go ahead, Josh.
Through your worship and to Councillor Oslich, just based on the recommendation that Councillor Barber had put forth and in following Rob's follow-up, it's my opinion that this would be appropriate for a sort of a friendly amendment, just being that it does really improve it does improve the motion as a whole. So with the mover and seconder, so being Councillor Oslich and Councillor Charlton, council could certainly consider improving that third clause to sort of broaden the scope from simply investigating the left-hand turn signals and the timing of the pedestrian crosswalk at the intersection to just investigating the turning signals and crosswalks at the intersection of Highway 3 and Highway 73.
Is that okay, Councillor Barber?
That's excellent, Your Worship. Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks, Josh.
And is that okay with the mover and seconder?
It's okay with me, Councillor.
Yes, and fine with me as well.
Okay. Are there any more questions or comments concerning this report? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. The next item up is reading of bylaws and proceedings thereon, third and final reading.
That council gives third and final reading to the bylaw 6821, being a bylaw to establish fees and charges for the corporation of the town of Elmer.
Okay, someone to move and someone to second. Councillor Charlton and Councillor Chapman. Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. And the next item up is three readings.
That council approves and gives three readings to the bylaw 6721, being a bylaw to amend the bylaw 0906, which is the bylaw to provide for the registering, licensing, restricting, and prohibiting of the running at large of animals and dogs within the town of Elmer. Bylaw 7521, being a bylaw to amend the bylaw 5799, being the zoning bylaw of the town of Elmer. Bylaw 7621, being a bylaw to authorize the signing of a purchase agreement between the corporation of the town of Elmer and Stouffer Ford Motors for the supply of one new 2022 Ford F-150 as outfitted specified in the tender submitted in the amount of $48,318.94 plus applicable taxes. Bylaw 7721, being a bylaw to amend the bylaw 6918, which is a bylaw to appoint Lisa Korab, operating as Korab Law as the Integrity Commissioner for the corporation of the town of Elmer pursuant to sections 9, 10, 11, and 223.3 of the Municipal Act as amended. The bylaw 7821, being a bylaw to establish development charges for the town of Elmer. And finally, the bylaw 7921, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council at all of its meetings held during the calendar year 2021.
Thank you, Josh. Someone to move and someone to second. Deputy Mayor Andrews and Councillor Chapman. Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. The next item up, inquiries by members. Go ahead, Councillor Barber.
Thank you, Your Worship. Southwestern Public Health is reluctant to change the way they calculate COVID results in the N5H postal code. Is there anything more that the town can do to encourage the health unit to put out more accurate figures?
Andy, would you like to answer that question, please?
Thank you, Chair French. So yeah, we have sent a lot of correspondence to the health unit, and I did hear back last week from Dr. Locke The health unit maintains that they're reporting correctly, but what we're starting to ask now is whether or not the mapping that they show on their dashboard is accurate, because they show us as a little dot there. So certainly I'd like their map to be correct on the boundaries, but to this point and throughout the pandemic, I think they've upheld that their reporting is correct, and it's hard for us to not having the information to definitively prove it wrong. So it is something that I will raise again in our conference call with them tomorrow. But it is an ongoing issue for advocacy that we're working on with them to get them to align the mapping in the cases correctly.
Councillor Barber, go ahead.
Just a quick follow-up to that, if I may, Your Worship. Do we know for sure whether the health unit is using the population of 15,000, which is the actual N5H data, and just referring to the town of Elmer being a population of 7,500? Which number are they using?
So yeah, I've asked for details on their methodology. And I didn't really get the details of how the methodology are. I didn't get this, you know, if you're preparing a study and doing something, you have a detailed methodology on how you're doing it. So I was anticipating that we would get that detailed methodology from the health unit on how they're assigning it. What I got told was essentially that they are assigning them correctly based upon the address in the postal code. But as you know, and I know, there's many, the postal codes around us sometimes have Elmer in the address line above it. So we did send them the specific postal codes and said, you know, these ones aren't in Elmer, so can you review? But we didn't get a direct response to whether or not those ones had been excluded. So we will go back and say, you know, the most recent data we have for our population is slightly over 8,000 now. So we'll go back and say, is this a pool of 8,000 that you're using for your numbers? And I'll mention that to them tomorrow.
Okay, are there any further inquiries by members? Okay, seeing none. Statements and committee reports. Go ahead, Councillor Oslach.
Yes, Your Worship. Ruby's and the Legion are putting on a Christmas dinner for the seniors and not the down and outs in Elmer tonight. And I talked to Ted around 5 o'clock, and he said he had 120 registers so far. The Legion takes all the registrations, and he is expecting over 200 tonight. And last year we had over 200 Christmas dinners, and Ruby's really prepared a fantastic Christmas dinner, including dessert. And I think vote of thanks should go out to Ruby's for providing this free of charge to the seniors and the homeless and the down and outs in Elmer.
Thank you, Councillor Oslach. Are there any other statements or committee reports this evening? Okay, seeing none, move into the report of the mayor. It's that time of year again, so I want to thank all of you. You've done a great job. Our staff and council have worked really hard this year, and I appreciate everything you've done. And I want to wish everyone a very happy Christmas and a happy New Year, as well as our residents. It's been a tough year for all of us, and I wish nothing but the best for everyone. And hopefully next year will be better. Notice of motion. Okay. Now we'll be moving into a meeting close to the public. So the resolution, please, Josh.
That council moves into a meeting close to the public at 8:47 p.m. to discuss the following matters. Director of Corporate and Legislative Services report Clerk 4921, respecting a recruitment update for the Manager of Human Resources, and Chief Administrative Officer report CAO 7221, respecting labor relations update. And these matters are pursuant to section 239 2D of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended, as the subject matter pertains to labor relations or employee negotiations. And the previous item refers to personal matters about an identifiable individual.
Thank you, Josh. Someone to move and someone to second. Deputy Mayor Andrews and Councillor Barber, are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried, and we'll just take a moment.